Hi, my name is Vaughn. If you've followed my channel, then you know that I'm a Nikon user and that I've had DSLR cameras and mirrorless cameras. Go to the link above. I've used those for various photography and video sessions. I have to admit this fault. I'm guilty of leaving DSLR cameras behind. I thought DSLRs were dead, so I sold my Nikon D800. This ended my relationship with DSLRs. To make sure that you don't end your relationship with your DSLR camera too soon, I'm giving you 9 reasons why you might want to reconsider your relationship with your DSLR camera. So let's start from the bottom and work our way up to number 1. Number 9, size and weight. If you've ever handled a DSLR camera, then they're heavy and bulky, and you put a f-mount lens on them and they weigh even more. And this is one of the considerations that most people trade in their DSLR. Now this D3S is about the same size as a D9. So as you can see, it balances this heavier f-mount 70 to 200 lens perfectly. So when I'm shooting, everything is balanced. And so as you can see, it stays stable. So when I'm shooting, the camera is stable and I don't have all this shake. When I have the Nikon Z6 II on it, that camera is lighter, and so the lens tends to take over and it's out of balance. And so I spend most of my time trying to correct it, which even with the IBIS may create shake if you're in a windy situation or in an unstable situation. So you might think about keeping that DSLR because of the weight. Now mirrorless cameras are lighter, but once you put the F to Z adapter on it, it adds a little bit of weight back to it. But as you can see, even with the grip, it feels like the camera lens is gonna break off the front of it because it doesn't feel like it can carry the weight. And this is the reason why I keep my DSLRs around, because they feel rugged and they don't feel like they're gonna break. That's one great reason to keep your DSLR cameras around, because of the stability and the ruggedness. Reason number 8, the viewfinder. The difference between the DSLR cameras and the mirrorless cameras are the DSLR cameras have what is called an optical viewfinder. And what that means is, with this optical viewfinder, you're looking at your subject through the lens, through a mirror in the camera, through a prism into the lens. You're looking at the subject in the real world. So there's no enhancements. With a mirrorless camera, you're using an EVF. And so with an electronic viewfinder, it's giving you a digital representation of the real world, which means that it's gonna brighten the colors a little bit, and it might add a little contrast. You know, it wants to make it pretty for you. And that's the reason why you pay that extra money for the EVF, because you wanted those 3.69 million dots like in my Nikon Z6 II. The cool thing about using an optical viewfinder is it's basically showing you what you would see with your eyes. The one thing I found out about the EVF is it doesn't always tell the truth. It makes the picture look that much better, but when you take the photo, it usually doesn't look anything like it was in the EVF. Another thing about EVFs and LCD screens, they drain your battery. They also create heat. So if you're outdoors and you have all this stuff going, all these electronics, you're creating heat. You're draining your battery. And that is another reason to have a DSLR, because if all else fails and your mirrorless camera goes down, you still have your DSLR with the optical viewfinder. Reason number 7, autofocus. I've done a few videos on autofocus. Go to the link above. Mirrorless cameras like this Nikon Z6 II rely on contrast detection autofocus through the image sensor. DSLRs use phase detection mode, which is an older, outdated autofocus mode. Contrast detection allows for more focus points and faster continuous autofocus. If you are a wildlife photographer or an action photographer, then using the mode dynamic autofocus is the way to go. This mode is the mode I use for action photography with my Nikon Z6 II and my Nikon D3S to get those fast moving shots. It's still a great mode for both cameras. The center autofocus point is the most important in dynamic autofocus. By using one focus point, the camera will initially acquire focus on that particular point, and as you pan and hold down the button, it will keep up with that subject and move through the focus points. But the issue with this mode sometimes is that while it's keeping up with the subject, it may focus on something else in the background and you won't know it until you look at your photos, and that's a bummer. And this happens with DSLRs and mirrorless cameras. Now, using the dynamic autofocus mode, which you'll use with older cameras, 3D tracking is available on the Nikon Z9. With these modes, you're basically shooting a lot of frames of burst mode, and basically what you're trying to do is capture the fast-moving photos. DSLRs can do the same function. If you're taking 100 photos like this Nikon D3S, it can machine gun a subject and capture like a fast-moving jet. And out of the 100 photos, you might have 5 to 10 keepers. And that's what you're looking for. Even with a mirrorless camera or a DSLR, you're looking for that 1 or 2 sharp photos that's a keeper. I want to highlight one Nikon camera, the Nikon D500. It has been used by DSLR, wildlife, and sports photographers to capture those shots. It's a crop sensor, not a full frame camera, and it's amazing. If you still use the Nikon D500, leave some comments on why you haven't sold or traded in your DSLR camera. Other users want to know why this camera is still versatile in today's mirrorless camera world. Leave those comments. Reason number 6, image stabilization. Most mirrorless cameras have in-body stabilization. And so what that means is with the image stabilization in the camera, you get 3 stops. And with the lens stabilization, you get 2 stops. And so altogether, you would get 5 stops with this particular camera. And that's great when you're out shooting fast-moving subjects and you want to capture them and keep them sharp and in focus. Older DSLRs, they count on VR, which is vibration reduction, and they use the lens vibration reduction for the image stabilization. And that works great. So you'll just get about 2 to 3 stops through the lens. So with older DSLRs, you have to increase the shutter speed, which means that you may have to change the aperture or the ISO to get the picture you want. By changing the shutter speed and the ISO and the aperture, you may have to go up in your ISO because you're having to use a faster shutter speed. And that's another reason why mirrorless cameras tend to be a little bit better than the older DSLR cameras. Reason number 5, battery life. If you've ever used a mirrorless camera, they have a lot of bangs and whistles. They have the LCD screen, they have the EVF, they have the dials, they have the autofocus, top screen. And so it's using a lot of battery power. And that is one of the reasons why DSLRs are so much better and they have a longer battery life than their mirrorless companions. With a DSLR, I can shoot photography for about 4 hours because it's just shooting photography. It's not trying to do video and photography, which drains the battery. And that's the reason why most new hybrid cameras have bad battery life. And that's the reason why I love my DSLR, because its battery life is amazing and it can go a long time. And that's what we're looking for. We're always looking to go just a little bit longer. Reason number 4, lens selection. When I purchased my first Nikon camera, I used the F-mount lenses. I carried along these F-mount lenses when I upgraded to a Nikon Z6 II, a Z-mount, and the F-mount lenses worked great. Some didn't work so great with the F to Z adapter. That helped out some, but I had to leave a few F-mount lenses behind. And so with the F to Z adapter and the new Nikon Z6 II, I was able to use F-mount lenses and use Z lenses. But the issue is, at the time there wasn't that many Z lenses, so I had to depend more on F-mount lenses. Eventually, I had to make a change because I figured out that with my f-mount lenses, I needed a second body where I didn't have to use my F to Z adapter. By repurchasing this Nikon D3S, I was able to use my f-mount lenses on a second body without having to buy a second F to Z adapter or a second mirrorless camera. And I was able to keep using f-mount lenses, which tend to be a little budget friendly and easier to maintain, and they're sturdier than the Z camera counterparts, the Z mount lenses. So think about a DSLR. Put one in your life. Reason number 3, video capabilities. Now, DSLRs aren't great with video, as you probably already know. The most they could do is 1080p. Some try to do 4K, and they don't do a great job. Plus, the f-mount lenses for the DSLRs are noisy and clanky, and they were just meant for photography. And if you've ever heard one in a video, you can tell when someone's trying to use a DSLR. It just sounds like a train wreck. So this is one of the reasons why, if you have a DSLR, you might consider trading it in. For me, I found out soon enough that even though I had this hybrid camera that did video and photography, I found out that the video had limitations. Even though this camera is great with video and photography and it does both, it doesn't do both well. It does photography well and it does video so-so. So what ended up happening is I ended up buying a Fujifilm X-HS2 because it does video well, and I don't have the same issues that I had with this camera not being able to keep up with my face in my YouTube videos when I move around like this. The Nikon Z6 II would focus over there, focus over there. If it lost my face, it wouldn't keep in focus. It does photography well, and that's the one thing about cameras is if you're carrying 2 cameras, you want to carry one camera that does video well and one camera that does photography well. And that's where a DSLR with its longer battery life during an event can help you. Reason number 2, burst mode and shutter speed. Mirrorless cameras have a faster burst speed and a higher maximum shutter speed in comparison to DSLRs. I sold my Nikon D800, which had 4 frames per second. The D3S has 9 frames per second, while my Nikon Z6 II has a maximum burst speed of 14 frames per second. While we're talking burst mode, let's talk about the noise produced during burst mode. This D3S sounds like this in quiet mode. Z6 II sounds like this in quiet mode. Most photographers like the silence of the mirrorless camera burst mode, but I like a little noise so that I know that I'm not firing off 100 worthless photos. All that power has its limitations. Mirrorless cameras have higher shutter speeds due to the use of an electronic shutter versus a mechanical shutter with DSLR cameras. With the use of an electronic shutter, photographers can capture faster moving subjects without blare and capture sharp photos at higher shutter speeds. But with electronic shutters, you have to be aware of the rolling shutter. So if you slow it down and just go mechanical, you will most likely get more keepers and you won't have to worry about saying you're sorry. And that's where DSLRs come in. With the slower speed of the mechanical shutter, you will get that shot you need. It might be at a slower shutter speed, but you will get more keepers. The number one reason why I repurchased a DSLR camera was the heat. Last summer, I was in a situation where I was at a car show and I brought my Nikon Z6 II and the Fujifilm X-H2S, which I had just purchased, and my iPhone 11 to a car show, and guess what? They all overheated within 15 to 30 minutes. The hot sensor warning came on all 3. We all had to take a break. We had to all go in the shade and cool down for 15 to 30 minutes and start it all over again. Within 15 to 30 minutes, all 3 shut down again, and I had to call it a day. So I didn't get as many photos as I wanted. So I had to leave because I didn't want to cause any more damage to my mirrorless cameras. So as I was driving home, I was thinking if I only had a DSLR, I most likely would have still been out there photographing instead of going home. Texas, it can get up to 106 degrees, and even in the evening time, it's still 95, and so your mirrorless camera is gonna overheat quick, especially if you're doing 4K 30 video, which is the standard for most people now. It's gonna overheat like within 10 to 15 minutes. If you're doing photography and video, it's gonna overheat even faster. With the DSLR, you will at least get to take some photos and continue your photo shoot. All these reasons that I mentioned in this video are a good reason to keep your DSLR. Sure, if you like reliability, then keep that DSLR camera. If you like chaos, then if you go with all mirrorless, then one day you're gonna regret it like I did. So don't end your relationship too soon with your DSLR. Don't end the relationship on a bad note by saying, bye, Felicia, and then having to go get that same camera back because you miss it. So please subscribe and watch my other videos on Nikon cameras, and thank you for watching.